here at the Kentucky Museum to look at the pieces that are potential for the Carrie Taylor exhibit. These are things that she designed and made for a number of different clients. And one of the things that the organizers wanted to have in the exhibit was a wedding dress. There are 3 potential wedding dresses, and here is one of them. It's the skirt, and this is the bodice. That is the skirt, and it turned out that none of the wedding dresses is really suitable to be displayed full out on a fold. But we are going to display this bodice and pair it with this one. So the white bodice, white and black contrast. And before anything happens to this, it needs to be hydrated.
Textiles are a lot like human skin. They are very susceptible to moisture or the lack of moisture. So if you were actually here, you could feel that this looks like cornflakes. The fibers are very hydrate the garment in a passive humidity chamber. The passive humidity chamber is nothing more than basically a tent made with a plastic bag and some uprights. You create a surface, tabletop will do nicely. You lay out your garment. You put small bottle bowls of water around the garment. You only need about 1 inch worth of water in the bottom. And then you cover the whole thing with a plastic painter's tarp with some uprights so that the plastic itself doesn't actually touch the garment. And you allow the garment to naturally absorb the humidity that's going to build up in that tent. You check on it periodically to make sure that you don't have any kind of droplets forming on the top of the plastic. But that technique, very low tech, doesn't cost any money, is remarkable in terms of returning the flexibility and the ability to sew back to the fibers. This skirt, however, when we looked at it more closely, has so much damage from over the years of handling and storage. Very major holes that to put it on exhibit, people would be offended if they saw it the way it would look. And although we certainly could do conservation work on it, and we'll definitely be hydrating it, putting it on exhibit is probably not a good idea. On the other hand, the bodice is in pretty good shape. It's missing its collar. It would have had a collar.
And the collar, we will do an interpretation of the collar for the use in the exhibit. And the other problem is this ruffle, which it has a number of holes, and so once this is hydrated, it won't be so dry, and it will be able to do what we call take a needle. In other words, we can put the needle in and stitch it, and it won't break the fibers. And I'll be using a special conservation net to line the whole thing. So I'll gather it up, stitch it. Well, I actually first stitch it along the bottom and then gather it up underneath. And then when it comes to the areas with the holes, I may take a fabric similar to this one and lay it in on top of the net, and then with thread that's as fine as hair, in fact we call it hair silk, stitch it down, and it will hardly show.
Yeah, the ruffle is gathered, therefore it's not as obvious that there are losses to it.
And
Visually.
Otherwise, the fabric is in pretty good shape. There are some other holes. We may take some of the net and just put it on top of it to stabilize it. And
It's got its Petersham, which is what you call the waist
This-
ribbon inside a garment like this.
and it has Mrs. Taylor's signature.
As does this one.
So we know this was made by her. And you can see how beautifully made it is with the lining and all the binding on the seams and so forth.
Also, just as an aside, in examining garments, you frequently find them with padding sewn inside the garment, around the bust area and under the shoulder blades. That's because the corsetry of the period did some odd things to your skeleton, leaving sort of depressions, as it were, that caused the fabric not to lie smoothly. So the dressmakers would compensate by putting little padded areas inside the garments to fill it out, smooth it out, so that there weren't these sort of odd wrinkles showing. It's very common in the period to find this kind of alteration to inside of the garment. Doesn't mean the woman was deformed or anything.
And we selected this bodice because it is basically in perfect condition. There were two other black bodices that weren't, and we're trying to minimize the costs for the conservation and stabilization. And this one, of course, has the label. This is one of the dresses that will be displayed on a form, and it dates from about 1917, which is near the end of Mrs. Taylor's career. There'll be two other dresses, one from the early 1890s and one from the early 1900s. So it'll span over 30 years, showing the difference in the change in style and also her work at the time. This dress is in pretty good shape, but it's file, that's what this fabric is, it's a silk file, it's a ribbed file, and it does have some areas of loss in the sleeves and under the arms. Over on this side, it's under the arm. And what will happen here is we will back it with another piece of file and stitch it down to fill in the area of loss, which probably won't show very much anyway once it's on the form. It's also missing some of its beading, and we will try to fill that in with some beads of the same type. Otherwise, it's in good shape, and will be displayed with the other dresses.
So this is again a two-piece dress. We had hoped that we could at least display the bodice. The skirt we knew immediately was not displayable because it's really quite badly faded. In the period, the light would fade colors. That's called, the color is therefore called fugitive. It's when basically the light is sunburning some of the fibers. And this comes from the way it was displayed at some point in its life. It sat in a puddle of sunshine over many days, many weeks, and even years. And the fabric itself is quite weak, although it was a very light fabric to begin with. The weft fibers have decided to fall apart on us. And that just happened. So we knew we couldn't use the skirt. The bodice, on the other hand, we thought at first was only going to require what some people call a stitch in time. And you can see a little better on the back how pretty the trim was on the back of this bodice. Obviously needs a little pressing, and a little stitching here and there. But the more we looked at it, the more we realized that the fabric of the bodice itself is in really poor condition, and that there's really no way to fix that. Furthermore, underneath the lace overlay had been a white silk underlay, and all of that has disintegrated.
Except for here it is along the edges.
Right along the edge, where it's caught in the
You can see
seam.
along the edge.
And it just became a bigger mess than we felt was warranted in terms of the amount of money it would take to put this back into condition. So we opted out. There is another dress in the collection that's very similar, so we knew that the look would be represented anyway. Part of this is it's like a big game of Tetris, is the amount of time, effort, and energy needed to bring this garment to life worth it, or could we better use those resources on another piece? And we decided we thought we could use it better on another piece. So that's what the determination.
These are 2 evening coats that will be displayed in a case, on forms, in one case, and this one dates from the 19-teens, and you could wear this today. And it has a big plus in that it is in very good condition. Its lining, which probably wasn't in good condition, has been replaced. And so this one will just go up on display as is. This coat has a very common problem with anything made of wool that is old. It has been attacked by moths. Not too badly, but enough so that you can see here how these holes show up and are very unsightly. It doesn't actually damage the wool that much because the wool is very sturdy fabric. But if you see how I'm pulling up the lining here, that fills in the hole. And that's what I'll be doing with a piece of wool that's very similar to this. Putting it underneath and stitching it around again with the hair silk. So the hole will still be there, but it will be a lot less noticeable. And there's really only a few holes in this. I've worked on things that had literally thousands. This will end up looking very nice. Now, to display this, it's very full, and it's going to need to be on a form with a skirt. And there is a skirt from the period we can use.
So that it makes more sense.
Yes, so
Visually makes more sense.
yeah, it dates from the early 1900s. And apparently, the dressmaker was known for her lace, use of lace. So this will be a very nice way to show off how she used that textile.
And much of this strand you could actually buy by the yard and decide how to use it. And that's essentially what she did here. She added components to create the design. The actual curly-cued trim was purchased already done that way. And then the seamstresses just laid them down and created the design using curly-cues. And it too has been relined. At some point in its history, somebody else thought it was really wonderful to wear again, and they replaced the line.
This is one of the other black silk bodices, and it does have some condition issues, which is why we decided to use the one that didn't have any condition issues. However, this one is going to be displayed so that you can see the interior construction. And this is typical of something that is made by a skilled dressmaker. And you can see here how the seams have been bound so they don't ravel. These are bows that worked with the corset that was underneath this to create the silhouette. And here are two hooks that the skirt would have hooked to help keep it all in place. That's one of the functions of these waist Petershams, was to sort of position the bodice on your body, and then you would hook the back of your skirt there to the bodice. This is the earliest of the dresses that's going to be on display, and it's got what we call a secure date because it's a trousseau dress. In other words, it was made at the time that this woman got married, and it was part of her trousseau, or the garments that she brought with her to the marriage that she had made just before she got married. And this is what's called an afternoon dress, and this would have been worn if you were going visiting or having visitors come to your house. And this dress probably would have been rejected as one that we could have worked on, except for the fact that it had extra fabric. So the fabric that's missing here, we're going to be able to take a piece from this piece of extra fabric that had come with the garment. Because trying to match this kind of color and trim would be very difficult. And what I'll be doing is turning the frayed edge under and setting a piece of this fabric up inside it so that it blends in with it, and then bringing it over the edge. All along the edge, it's got this problem all the way along the edge. And then under the arms, it's very deteriorated, possibly caused by somebody wearing it later on, not the original wearer, who was not as careful. So this will be, again, replaced with the new fabric.
Now we've got the skirt here, and we've turned it inside out, because I'm going to talk to you about something called inherent vice. And that is a chemical within the fibers of the fabric that cause the fabric to disintegrate. And in this instance, this is one panel of what had been a brown lining, different fabric from what's lining the bodice, and it has literally, the weft fibers have disintegrated, only leaving the warp fibers. And in this instance, it does not affect the way the skirt will hang on the form. We'll just be taking it out and putting the right amount of supported petticoats underneath, and so that'll be fine. The waistband is going to need a lot of work, but again, the waistband can be supported. We can do some under support here, and physically it won't show because the bodice will cover up the waistband. But it's a gorgeous fabric, a really good example of the period in terms of design.
And here on this Petersham is another instance of the inherent vice. And you can see this is what the fabric looked like original. And here you can see that these probably weft threads on this ribbon are still intact. That means that they were not weighted or had the sizing applied to them. But the weft threads that had worked their way through it to create the fabric have completely disintegrated.
It's a chemical reaction that's a lot like over-permed hair. There's nothing to do to return it to its original condition. And it was a way of making expensive fabrics, cheaper fabrics seem to be expensive. And they were even talking about it in the period that the fabrics being shipped over from Germany weighed more than they should have in the whole of the ship. So they knew something was going on. We still weight silk today. Your silk satin wedding gowns are treated with starch, not with the chemical salts that was used here, but it's the exact same thing, trying to make a less important piece of fabric feel more lustrous and luxurious.
The other thing that we'll be doing for this dress is to take this lace off and wash it or wet clean it.
Right, same with the cuffs.
And the cuffs too.
Because it's just been slip stitched in. You can do that no problem.
And it will still be a beige color, but it won't be as dark as it is now. It was never white. Okay.
So here again, we've just discovered inherent vice. Here it is again. They call this shattered silk syndrome. Again, the iron salts were used to weight the silks, to make them feel more lustrous and heavier. And as you can see, they are essentially completely disintegrated. You may have seen crazy quilts that suffer from the same thing. It's just very specific to a narrow window of time, the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. And there is absolutely nothing that can be done. So what we'll do here is this inset in the sleeve just goes up to about here. So we'll just replace it with a new piece of silk. Unfortunately, the lace is not salvageable either, but without the lace, it's still very, very pretty.
And this same fabric is here in the bodice, and it's also splitting, but there's no way to replace it there. So in this case, we'll cover it with the netting to stabilize it. Otherwise, the fabrics are in good condition, which is lucky, and it dates about 10 years later than the blue-gray and white print. So this gives a good feeling for the change in style, which included what was called a powder pigeon look. And here we have what the dressmaker has made this as a built-in feature of this dress to give that sort of poofy look. And its skirt is in pretty good condition except for the very top of the waist. Again, we'll be able to stabilize that.
One of the tricks we can use when the fabric at the waistline is being pulled off the waistband is we can create a suspender situation where pieces of twill tape starting at the hem will go up and anchor themselves underneath and go up over the form that they have it on. And that way, the weight of the skirt is not hanging on the waistband, it's actually hanging on the twill tape, like suspenders. And it's really great. It prolongs the life of the garment.
And that's something
allows us to display
that
it.
would be done when it's getting ready for display.
Right.